Welcome back to Murali End. My name is Mark Machado. I'm joined by Sri Lanka's #1 sports journalist, Estelle Vasudevan, and the professor of cricketology, my cousin Dominic Machado. We have been reviewing in part one. We reviewed all the batting and all the bowling, and in this part, we're going to answer your questions. Before we get on to that, let me remind you to hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button, and also, if you need a mortgage, get in touch with Mikey Ward Mortgages. All the details are below. He does mortgages in the UK, in the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. He can help from first-time buyers all the way to people who want to buy the Burj Khalifa. If you wanted to, he could sort that out for you. Though I did hear recently that apparently in the UAE, if you don't keep up with your mortgage payments, you get sent to prison. So if you are getting a mortgage, make sure you can afford it. And also to quote Murali End as well, if you get in touch with them. Right, guys, should we just dive into these questions? I'll start off with the question I got emailed in from Ruan, who I met at the Three Falcons. He came down. Right. He flew in from Seattle, went to the game with his mate Manoj for a couple of days, and they came and partied with us. That's the night that ended at 2 a.m. in a Margaret Thatcher themed nightclub. We don't need to talk about that. That was wild. So good. So good. And that actually, do you know what? The highlight of the whole series for me was just meeting other Sri Lanka fans, right? Because obviously I am kind of in exile as a Sri Lanka fan in London. They coming over not as frequently as they used to, and it was just great being with other fans. I loved it. That's what this whole podcast is about, right? Here's written, the series had a feeling of changing off the guard in terms of our batting squad. Well, a couple of the youngsters outperforming the veterans. Going forward, how should we handle the transition away from Matthews, Karuna right there, and Chandimal? Who should they be replaced with? The last time our batting lineup lost a core group of batters like this, our team was in the wilderness for a while. I think this is a really great question, and it's one of the big themes of a lot of the other questions that we've kind of had in. And we did touch this a little bit in part one. I think it might not be as dramatic as when the last time we lost a kind of group of senior players, a clump of senior players, mainly because as it stands right now, and this obviously, cricket's a moving feast, we're just not as reliant on these three players to score runs as we were even, it feels like even a year ago, right? We're seeing the emergence of, patterns obviously emerged. We know Kusal Mendes is by the sounds of it, from what you hear from the squad, he's going to be in and around this team, the Red Bull team. DDS is obviously captain. He's quite a bit younger than those three senior players, and Kamindi Mendes has been scoring runs. So in that four, that's the kind of four that we're going to look to take forward. And I think there's a clump of players coming through, isn't there, Dom, who have got either a little bit of experience or you kind of think could kind of plug in and can eventually grow into the roles, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that to me stands out about this next generation of players is that there is a multitude of talent. There's a lot of talent out there. There are a lot of players who can come into this side and potentially contribute. It's not a sense of where we're going to rely on 2 or 3 guys and say, okay, you're the next Sangha, you're the next Mahela, go score runs for us, right? And I think, in fact, that has hurt the mentality of those players. Rather than being given a role, their role was be the next Sri Lankan great. So we need to think carefully about who to bring in. I think this South Africa A series, and we should probably talk about it more when it comes to the white ball side of things too, but the red ball side of things has been brilliant. They've played really, really well. They're in position to win. I think they need 174 to chase down the total tomorrow, which would be a big win. But Oshada Fernando, who had been in the wilderness for a little while, scored a big 100. He's someone, again, who can bat at the top of the order, has done so in difficult conditions. We all remember his 75 in that second test against South Africa, where he looked $1 million. He's someone that has a lot of talent and who can come back into the side. Some of the younger guys like Basindhu Surya Bandara has looked good. He's played well in A tours over the last year. Young player. He's a middle order batter. He's one of those guys I think you could slot into 4, 5, or 6 pretty well. And there are talented guys like Nuanindu Fernando, who, again, his record doesn't quite do justice to the amount of talent, but he looks a player who certainly could do that. Nippon Dhanajaya has been moved to open in first class for cricket and is averaging 50 at that. So there's a lot of talent sort of down the line. And lest we forget Nishan Madushka, who was kind of unceremoniously dropped during the middle of this tour. We have 5 or 6 players who have put up big numbers in first class cricket or have significant talent that are kind of waiting in the wings. And I think it's a matter of thinking who's going to fit the certain roles that we need to build out a good top 7, right? I think we should worry less about those individual scores of, okay, he got a 50, he got a 60, whatever. How are we going to build a complementary batting unit that understands how to bat with each other and can build? I think one question that's got to be answered is who is the next wicket keeper after Chandi? I know Randika is the wicket keeper on the A side, and he seems talented, but whether he's ready to make a leap to Test cricket just yet is I'm not sure about that.
Estelle, can I throw 3 names at you who are more famous for their white ball exploits? So I think might be in consideration. I'm trying to think what the selectors might be thinking, right? Which is always difficult when you're Sri Lanka because there's always the risk that Jeevan Mendes might make his return to the squad. Sadira, Charith, and Avishka. Are they going to come in? Are they going to end up playing red ball cricket soon? Do you think? Or when I say, I know Sadira's with this squad, so are they getting into this 11? Are they the natural replacements?
I think Sadira is certainly someone who they can consider because he's, I know, I mean, he's been kind of labeled as the wicket keeper batter, right? But he's more of a batter than someone like Niroshan Dikwala. From what we've seen in international cricket, right? So he could possibly be one who slots into number 7 if, as we expect, Kamini Mendes to move up the order, right? Then that position becomes vacant. I'm not very sure about Avishka Fernando because I feel like he still hasn't cracked limited overs cricket, right? I mean, he's been good in ODI cricket. He struggles a bit in T20 cricket, middle order, opening. I think he's still not that settled player who you can confidently put in, and you want those players to kind of find their place, right? Because Avishka Fernando is a really talented guy, right? So you want him to settle down and understand his role and understand his game and how he needs to play. Charit is another one, an interesting one, because Charit Asalanka, for as long as I can remember, has always been a player people were talking about in terms of future captain, right? All format captain. And it's very interesting to me that he hasn't really got a regular go at red ball cricket because it feels like some parts of his game really would suit the way Test cricket is played now. So I think sometime in the future, possibly he would have an opportunity. A couple of other guys like Dom mentioned, Oshita Fernando is definitely one option. He's been making runs, and I think what Sri Lanka did not so well in that period where he kind of got dropped was that as soon as a player shows some promise in one format, they chuck him into everything else. And that's what happened to him. I will not forget his run in England during COVID. It was painful to watch, I thought, in ODI cricket, right? He just could not get bat on ball. And I think that probably, I mean, I would expect that had a lot of a huge impact on his mentality as well, right? Because in Test cricket, in that South African tour, he looked like a really good player. The only concern for me is he's already 32. So he possibly doesn't have as long a run as guys like Kamindu and Pathum, who are like 5-6 years younger than him, right? But he could be one of the guys you look at either at the top of the order once Dimuth is gone, or at number 3. Lahiru Udara is another guy. If I'm not mistaken, he and Pathum were the ones who were making lots of runs in domestic cricket. Everybody was asking about, why aren't they being included? Why aren't they being included? Pathum got his shot, but Udara never did, right? So he is another guy who I would look at. Hasn't yet.
He's a little older, but he does keep wickets. That's the other big thing.
Nuanindu, very talented. Again, I wouldn't rush him into uh, the test side just yet because, like, I mean, he hasn't he hasn't established himself anywhere yet, right? So those are a few. I think again, like the talent is obviously not lacking, and I do think I agree with Dom completely in that it feels like it's not going to be as bad a drop as it was when we saw Mahela Sangha, Dilshan all leave, right? Because you've got guys like Kamindu and Patum who are already at least in Pathum's case, he's already an established international cricketer. It's just Test cricket that he needs to kind of work, play a lot more now. Kamidu has got a really good start to his Test career. To be fair, Nishan Madushka and Sadira have also had good starts to their careers, right? You're not really expecting a guy going to England for the first time in his life to get loads of runs. I mean, there are going to be exceptions like Pathum and Kamindu, but you know that's something that you can hope will get better because obviously if they picked him, they see something in him, right? So Nishan Madushka and Sadira also got runs against, was it Ireland that he got 100?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
a double
So
hundred, right?
was it a double 100?
Yeah, he got a
Yeah.
double hundred
Yeah.
against them. Yeah,
Yeah. So I think there's definitely a few players that can be tried out, and I I'm really glad that Kamindu and Patu made it work so well in this series
yeah,
because it gives you then the confidence to give more younger players opportunities, right? Because it's very easy to stick with the same experienced players who have done really well. I mean, people make fun of Matthews, right, and his technique and everything that was discussed during this series. He has an average of 45 in Test cricket, right?
Yeah.
He is a good batter in Test cricket. He's been one of Sri Lanka's best batters, right? So it's easy to stick with them, but I think the emergence of Kamindu and Pathum also gives Sri Lanka cricket a type of formula in how you introduce these new players to Test cricket, right?
yeah. And I'll add one small thing here. I think the younger generation, the sort of first full generation post Sangha and Mahela that's coming up now, they're very smart cricketers. They're very quick learners. And we've seen this with Kamindu, we've seen this with Potham, but I think also on the white ball side, we've seen it with someone like Duneth Walalage,
Mm.
Mahesh Deekshana, and Matisha Patirana. They're always adding, new tricks to the bag. They're always working on something. They're always developing things, and they're doing it apart from their connection to SLC. So the fact that you have players who have ways and can teach other players ways of developing and progressing is something that has me very hopeful that these are smart, intelligent players who aren't looking to be spoon fed the answers, but can kind of problem solve by themselves and grow and develop in the game that way.
Let's look at some more questions. Arjuna Ranavera, who should have come and seen me and met me during the test, but he said I can't remember what his reason was, but he didn't. Also asked the same question: should we look beyond Angie and Chandy? Shamir Kadir asked a similar question. He did ask, how is life beyond Dimmock? Do we have our next opener? He also asked about Kusal Mendes' future. We talked extensively about Kusal Mendes in part one of this, if you haven't listened to it, but we kind of all are on the fence with it. But we also think, Sanis said that he thinks Kusal's good to go for Test cricket, so they think they might have rectified some of the issues that he was having when playing red ball cricket. So there we go. Our next opener, I think we talked about that briefly in the previous answer as well. Arjuna asked another question. What is next for Milan? Should he focus on red ball? Should SLC consider him for white ball cricket? Personally, there'd have to be a heck of a lot of injuries for him to get into a white ball squad.
Yeah.
I think, right? Because I think that white ball squad's fairly well set. And I mean, with Thushra Patarana, Madhu Shankar, and then I'm trying to think who, and Shamira, I mean, you'd have to have kind of 2 or 3 injuries, I think, before Banera would be the next in line for me into that, and then probably Kamara, and then Asta, and then maybe Milan over, and obviously Kasim Rajta is always
Rajita,
stalking every
yeah.
squad,
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So I think you're looking at about 5 or 6 injuries before Milan got a shot. I'm not saying he's not great. The other thing about Milan that is you might need to have to watch to like be there more as much as I was to notice is how good he is in the field. He's an incredible fielder.
Yeah.
He's by far and away the most athletic fielder we've got, or at least until Ashwin Bandara comes back into the side or finds his way onto the pitch somehow. Deekshana, I'm not sure if it's that Deekshana or not, is messaged in asking what changes need to be made for the NZ series. And also, are there any players that should be exclusively focused on the Test cricket in the SL side, apart from those that already do? Changes for the NZ series, I think they've both been played at Gaul, so they might bring in an extra spinner and possibly drop the two pacers who didn't get selected. Daraka, I don't think he's never featured, so I imagine he'll get dropped, and they might bring in. I was going to say Pravin Jayawardene, but he can't be selected at the moment.
Yeah.
For silly reasons. So yeah, I wonder who that extra spinner might be. I imagine it'll be one of the hundreds of left-hand spinners that we have. That will no doubt, if given a shot, cause a lot of issues to New Zealand. I'd assume, I can't think of any other changes that might happen.
Yeah, because so I'd imagine, right, Ramesh Mendes, who was in the squad, Parbat Jayasuriya, Jeffrey Van der Say are probably definitely in, right? I'd imagine that they're dead certs for to make the squad. And then, because it's a home series, I don't know if they'll name a full 15 or they'll just kind of have like a 12, 13 around the squad. I think the big question is what they do with Madushka and Crystal Mendes, right? That seems to be the decision points. As Mark said, Sanat seems to be convinced that Kusal is going to continue, but we'll see what happens. And Nishan Madushka, right? He, I mentioned in the last part, I feel like he got kind of a raw deal by being dropped after the second match. So I'm curious to see what they do. I think we might see changes to the batting lineup. Maybe I know there's been a lot of discussions about where Kamindu is going to bat. I'm kind of ardently of the opinion that they shouldn't make any changes unless they have a real long-term plan. You shouldn't move up Kamindu for one series. It should be, okay, we're going to give him a run of 3 series at this number and see how he does. So I'd like to see if there are changes, any like sort of a clear way of thinking about it. I expect Potham to make a lot of runs in Sri Lankan conditions. I think he should be very good. We'll see if he prefers to open or bat at 3. I think that's another question that'll come up.
Can I just make one point about Kamindu that we didn't make in part 1? England have a lot of issues getting middle order batters out. Like the low middle order the last 3 or 4 years has been a really difficult place for England to get wickets. They've lost whole series.
But if you look at, I mean, one thing you have to, I think, say is that wasn't a very good England lineup, right? I mean, I think that's why some of the regret comes that Sri Lanka could have done better, because Sri Lanka was so focused on Mark Wood, and Mark Wood got injured in the first game, right? And then it was just Chris Wokes. I know Gus Atkinson bowled well in spells, Ollie Stone, they bowled well in spells, but this isn't the most dangerous English bowling lineup you would face. Like, it's probably one of the most inexperienced we'll ever face, right, in English conditions. So I think that could have been a factor as well with the middle order wickets.
Yeah, and really, our seniors should have done a bit better, right? If between them they didn't get a single century.
How many hundreds were missed, right? How many centuries were missed? I know DDS did really well. Like, I mean, he rescued Sri Lanka a couple of times in the series, right? But he'd be disappointed he didn't convert one of those innings to 100. Similarly, Chandimal also had his opportunities. I don't think Dimuth or Angelo really got going. But DDS for certain would be a bit disappointed that he couldn't convert one
Yeah,
of those to 100.
yeah, and I
Um,
think even
I'll go on.
no, I was going to say even Kamindu, I think
Mm.
in that first innings of the third test would have thought, okay, this is a chance to go. I'm batting with DDS. This is a chance to go get 100 and get us into the lead. So I think that's something. And again, there's the reason for that. I think is tricky because they don't play a ton of red ball cricket, and because a lot of these guys are multi-format players, they end up playing a lot of white ball. So I think maybe that concentration may flag, once you've batted for 4 or 5 hours, they don't have the ability to kind of stick with it and say, okay, I'm gonna keep on batting and keep on going.
Um, Sam asked the big question: is
Mm.
Sanath a good coach? Other than that minor issue with the toss at Lords, Field was pretty strategically astute, and the boys seemed motivated under him. So the message I'd heard from SLC was that part of the reason he was picked was because he would bring discipline into the team that maybe was slightly lacking at the World Cup, which is a bit of an odd decision because he was at the World Cup in a very similar capacity. But presumably didn't feel empowered enough to stop them going to Louis Vuitton. But, presumably in London he has. It's for me, I think the jury's still out, right? Because I think you look at that white ball series against India, and you think after the way they lost the T20 games, he's probably got 3 more matches, and then they come back and somehow manage to win the ODI series. And then you kind of think after Lords, you're like, when it kind of petered out those 2 matches for Sri Lanka into kind of nothingness. You kind of think if he loses at the Oval, that's it, and then he manages to snatch not manages you can't just climb over. You don't just win a Test match. They did it quite well in the end, and then you kind of think, well, obviously they've got to keep him on for New Zealand. It's really interesting when I was watching them train, and I know Estelle, you've watched them train loads. And maybe they're just like this all the time with all the coaches, but all the players seem to be having loads of fun. And it's just like, it's pure joy when they're all together just playing football, even though they are the worst footballers I've ever seen. I can see why Gianni Infantino makes several trips to Colombo because it does feel like an emergency situation watching them play football. It's I don't know because there's a lot of senior players, so I kind of like it's difficult. I think it's just difficult in cricket to know if someone's a good coach or a bad coach, right? Because obviously no coach is going out there telling them to throw away their wickets. They've shown improvement through this series. We're now sitting here thinking, winning 2 wins against New Zealand, 2 wins against South Africa, that pretty much guarantees us that we're coming back to London next year, right? So, I mean, I think it's
2
like
wins
a
in
different.
South Africa.
Only
I
two wins.
know. Only 2 wins when Asian teams have won their
I
like
think we
5
need.
times ever or something.
I think we need 5 wins actually of the 6
Yeah,
games.
5 from 6, right? There's the
Yeah.
New Zealand series
Australia.
at home, Australia at home, and at South Africa.
Yeah.
That's easy.
Yeah, on Sanath, I think one thing, and I think people feel that this or see it. So, who was it? I think Moin Ali was talking about Brendan McCullum and talking about how it's easy to follow what he says because he's the way he played cricket. The way he played cricket. So when he talks about playing that way, it's very easy to kind of buy into it and do it because we've seen him do it, right? And I think a similar case can be made about Sana Jayasuriya because most of these guys would have grown up watching him, right? Most of them would have grown up knowing that this is a legend of Sri Lanka cricket.
That's not. They'll know he's a legend, but they wouldn't have seen him play Test cricket. They're too.
Yeah, no.
They're too
What I
old
mean
for that.
is,
Oh, sorry, they're too young for that.
no. I mean, no. So
As
in
they might
the
have
year
been, they might have been alive. They might have been alive,
Yeah.
but they weren't. They wouldn't have been looking at like how's he actually doing it.
but
They'd have just
okay.
seen-
So
Yeah.
growing
They've
up,
watched
they
it
would,
on YouTube,
yeah,
Mark.
they or they've heard of the exploits of Sanat, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think there is that makes an impact as well. The second thing is the language is probably really important, right?
Mm,
I know they understand English, but there's a difference between like basic understanding and really understanding what coach is able to you know tell you, right? Communicate, and we know things can be lost in translation, as we saw Sangha. I don't know if you guys got it, but Sangha translated what Lahiru Kumara and Asita Fernando were discussing
yeah,
to the English media, and it was a very, very demure translation of what was actually said, right?
yeah.
So I think those things do have an impact, right? And it's very easy to take instruction from someone who you have grown up looking up to, or you have been kind of, it's been conditioned into yourself that you need to look up to this guy, right? So if it says go out there and play attacking cricket, it's easy to follow that because you know how he played, right? Whereas if I tell Kusal Mendes, uh, you should get your back leg back and across and not get squared up so much, he's going to be like, what the hell are you talking about, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I think that does have an impact, but I we saw traits of what we saw as Sanat Jayasuriya as a selector, the chopping and changing and switching and pulling strings and all of that. We saw it in a like a very condensed version during this series, which is to me the worrying part, right? Particularly, I mean, Kusal Mendes, okay, he's an established white ball player. He probably be okay. Nishan Madushka, I thought, like Dom said, right? He got a real raw deal because you're brought in to open in the first game, your first game in international cricket in England. You don't get runs. Then in the next game, the senior guy is dropped and you're retained. So there's a little bit more pressure on you. And then you're given the gloves and told to open, right? So uh, it's not it's a lot of those things that we didn't like during Sanat's tenure as chairman of
Mm.
selectors that we saw. So I don't know how you can kind of assess the situation, but as long as the results are coming, I don't think anyone is going to care about the technical aspects that he brings to the game or doesn't bring to the game, right? Because he is the type of he's very loved in Sri Lanka. I think if you do Sanat Jayasuriya podcast every week, it'll get huge numbers every week because people love him, right? And part of the reason for that is also that he's so
Don't give me
he
ideas, Estelle. Don't-
I mean, you should have asked him and rubbed his head or something. You met him,
yeah,
didn't you?
yeah, I did. Yeah, yeah, I made him laugh. But we don't need to talk about
We,
that.
it's tough because I think the victory covers over a lot of mistakes
Yep.
that were made. I think Estelle pointed to it with Nishan Madushka being one of them. But some of the decisions that were made were absolutely baffling, right? Like leaving out Patham and Kamara in the first match, where I think Kamara is your biggest match winner in the ball in English with the ball in English conditions. And if you truly believe Patham is the best batter in Sri Lanka, there's absolutely no excuse. One of those guys can make way, right? The other part is then in that second match, deciding to, bowl first
Mm.
in batting friendly conditions.
Against Ian Bell's
Yeah, against it, right? The guy
Advice.
you brought in to say, like, to
to be
advise,
I just have to add, like, when I saw Mark saying that in the previous pod, I was shocked. But it just does not make sense, right?
right? And it's this backward thinking, right? Of like, hey, let's make sure we don't have a collapse on the first day because that'll look really bad. And I think there were a lot of times where those backward steps were taken. I thought there were times where I think the difference in the third match is they played attacking cricket. They weren't on the back foot. It seemed like they were playing to just kind of show that they deserved to be invited in the first two matches at times, where they could have put the foot down, been more aggressive. There's the rashness I think Estelle brought up. what was it, the third day's play, they had England 73 for 6. And then they go to this short ball method, right? When you're getting a swing from Vishwa, you're bowling good balls and getting batters out, and now you just leak, 80 more runs that really
Yeah,
didn't need to be
that
leaked.
was part of that. I think that someone needed to rein in the bowlers, because that's what they were discussing, right, when they were
Yeah,
batting. Lahiru and Asita were like, we should give them some of this when they
yeah,
come into bat, but they kind of got carried away with it.
yeah, and yeah,
Kamara does
exactly,
play best when he's angry, though, right? Like he's like the Incredible Hulk,
yeah,
isn't he?
Yeah,
We don't want
and he
Doctor
did, and
Banner.
I
We
mean,
want Incredible Kamara, right? Like
yeah. And I mean, he always bowls well against England. We saw what he did in the World Cup where he kind of stormed through them. But, even I think there was a point in that first test, there were, they had bowled well for, or maybe it was in the second test. It was they had bowled well for 60 overs. And then all of a sudden, Sanath picks up the radio and clearly tells them to bowl Kamindu, and he gets carded for like 25 runs in 3 overs, and all the momentum that they had built up had just gotten lost because they'd gone a little bit without getting a wicket, and he thought, okay, let's try something new. So I think what I see as the problem is that inability to think about that long term. And I don't know how much of that is the interim tag versus not having the long term tag. But I think one of the things we've talked about repeatedly on the podcast is someone needs to have a vision for this side, because the talent is there. And that vision is putting those players in the right places to succeed in the future. And that's what I haven't seen from Sanath, is that ability to step back and think, okay, this is a player who has a lot of talent. How do I treat him for the next year? Right? Like, whatever we want to say about Mickey Arthur and Chris Silverwood, someone like Patham Nissanka owes their steadfast support, right? Like, their steadfast support meant a lot to Patham's development as a player. We wouldn't have had him be the player he is now, if perhaps Asanath was in control. Like, I could
yeah.
imagine him being dropped, right? Or him being pigeonholed into one particular format. So for me, it stands like, what worries me is that selection, what you said, Estelle, when he was a selector. Is it going to be chopping and changing? Because I don't think that's what the squad needs. I think someone with a good vision, with a good plan for how these players are to play together, not just to win the next match in front of them, but to be one of the best teams in the world.
Yeah.
Because we'll go back to the India series. Rank turners for those 3 ODI matches. Again, it was great to see Sri Lanka win, but is that something that necessarily in the long term is going to be beneficial for the side? And I know it was great for Sanath and for the team to win those matches and to say they beat India in an ODI series, but again, are we thinking about what's going to happen in 2027 when we're playing in South Africa? Right. So yeah.
I was just going to say, I just think, professional sport exists to bring joy to people, right? And the nature of that ODI series win against India and the nature of the win at the Oval leaves us all coming off the back of both those series, just filled with filled with joy. And Sanath,
And we have to be the rain. We have to be the rainmakers. So we
I
gotta.
think I
yeah,
think it that applies to the fans, right? It's great.
Yeah.
But at the back, like the backroom guys need to be thinking ahead. Like, we are thinking
yeah.
about tomorrow and winning tomorrow, but the backroom need to be thinking about what's ahead.
The next question I think is related to this, right? SVS has said, do you think there's a realistic possibility of Sri Lanka making the London game? I'm not going to say it. 4 wins at home against New Zealand and Oz, and just need to somehow win one game against South Africa, who are not at their best. I'm just gonna say, I think we can. I think it's possible. I think
Mark's gonna say we're gonna win 6, right?
6. Yeah, we're gonna. Yeah.
Look, what's the point if you're not dreaming, right? What's the point? I mean, I say it all the time. No one thought 96 was possible. No one thought little old Sri Lanka could keep eating at the top table. Here we are, all these years later. We're still in it.
But
We've got to find.
you know
We've
what?
got to find a way. Go on.
just looking at the oval test as well, I was just thinking, in a way, the fact that it is a surprise is what makes it worth it for us as well, right? Like,
Yeah,
not expecting to win and then winning, like the Women's Asia Cup, the Men's Asia Cup, the World
yeah,
Cups, right? All of that. The fact that we're just, we're not the best team in the world. We're not, destroying other teams.
yeah.
And then we win this tournament and it's awesome. That's what makes it good to be a fan.
Yeah,
You
but
live for
remember,
the highs.
it was always like that, right? Because they're
Yeah.
like we've retrofitted what it was like in the kind of glory
Yes.
days, right? In our dominant
Yeah.
decade, we were
Yeah.
terrible at bilaterals. We only ever
Mm.
did it at major tournaments. Now it's
Yeah.
kind of flipped, where we're terrible at major tournaments, but we're absolute bilateral bullies. Um,
Yeah.
so
Bilateral bullies. We need that. We need that T-shirt there, Mark.
yeah, oh gosh. And I just think, like, look, what's the point of being a fan? I know people are always taking the mick out of me for my never-ending optimism. What's the point of being a fan, right? If you don't believe, what am I going to say? I think we're going to finish eighth. I think we're going to finish honourably fourth. We're not England. Like, we came like. We're gonna go out, and if we don't win, we die, and that's fine. We're dead. Like, like you can't hurt me when I'm dead.
Look,
Like,
look. It, I think like you could. There's a way you could convince yourself of this happening. I'm not saying it's likely, right? I think New Zealand is going to be dangerous. They have very good batters who can score in those conditions, like Devin Conway, Rachin Ravindra, who's been practicing his red ball game, Kane Williamson, of course, Daryl Mitchell. Those guys have all burnt us in the past.
Mm.
And they always seem to unearth a spinner who's just able to do enough. Was it Ajaz Patel who spun them to one victory? And I think we just need to, it's possible to beat them, but we have to be good. They're not a
Yeah.
rollover side. Can they win in South Africa? Possibly, right? I think 2019 happened, and that squad was much worse than this one. And I think South Africa is not investing as much in Test cricket as they used to. So it's you can convince yourself to each of these individual games. Oh yes, Sri Lanka has a good chance to win it. But do I think the totality of it adds up to Sri Lanka qualifying? But I do kind of like this storyline where we kind of play middling Test cricket, and then like a year out, it's like, oh, we still kind of have a chance to make the World Test Championship final, because it does add a little bit of flavor. Like we all remember that first New Zealand Test at the beginning of 2023, where they
Yeah.
won in the very very last ball.
Mm.
It was an exciting watch. There's a lot on the line,
Yeah.
and it gives them something to play for, right? It gives
Mm.
they're excited. That adds a storyline to it. I say go for it. I am an optimist. Like I always go in thinking Sri Lanka has a better chance than they actually do.
Mm.
But then the rational side of my brain turns on and is like, when things don't go well, it's like, yeah, I know that this is a problem. I know that this is an issue. So
I just think there's no point not believing, right? At this stage, what have I got to lose? Just believe, just dream, allow myself to dream. Every other aspect of my life
yeah,
is miserable,
dreaming is
right?
fine. Expecting
Yeah,
is another thing.
every other aspect of my life is
See, this is the
miserable.
thing, Mark. Though I feel like this is the difference, though. I think dreaming is totally okay. It's when the dreams go to expectations that's the problem, because then our players get hammered for it, right? It's like, oh
Yeah,
well, we expect them to sweep New Zealand at home. It's our job to say that New Zealand is a good squad and that they're not going to roll
Yeah.
over. I think that's kind of the dual thing. So me as a fan, I'm dreaming, okay, what if this happens, and I can think of the possibilities. But as sort of taking the 30,000-foot view, I don't want people to come out believing, okay, this is a hop, skip, and a jump. We're basically in the World Test Championship now that we've won one match.
But if it does happen, we are doing a Murali party in London, aren't we?
We're going.
100%.
I'm committed to that.
Like 100%. Like book the three Falcons. I know what's going to happen. I absolutely know what's going to happen. It's going to be India at Lords. Like, oh, it's just such a carnival of colonialism. Sri Lanka versus India at Lords. We're gonna be down the three Falcons every night. I'm gonna have to. Oh, I'm gonna explode with excitement if it happens. It's almost better for my heart that it doesn't happen, because that, if it did happen, the end result will be diabetes for Mark. I've lost everyone.
Can I just say, how bad do those two losses to Pakistan look now, right? Again, it's one series at home. We had to pull off something that could have had like a huge impact on the entire World Test Championship.
You know, and it's interesting, Estelle, because I think it speaks to really poor planning, because they got off the flight from the World Cup qualifiers, and then 3 days later they're playing a test, and Pakistan has spent a month preparing. Of course they're going to get drubbed, right? That's I think part of it is bad thinking, part of it is arrogance. Okay, we just show up at Gaul and victories are handed to us. We can't take that for granted. And I am a little worried about this first New Zealand test, because I know New Zealand's playing right now against Afghanistan. They've been,
but it's
thinking
been
about
2 days. They haven't played.
No
they haven't
play.
played any cricket. It's been wet.
Yeah,
like the rain gods are on Sri Lanka's side here, Dom. They believe.
They believe.
Guys, should we leave it there? The only other question came in was Bash asked if Kusal Mendes is done, especially in Test. Who are suitable replacements? Bash, we talked about this extensively in the first pod, in part one. Sanath Jayasuriya, our coach and leader, doesn't believe Kusal is done. So I think if you're not a fan of his, you're going to have to, I don't know, somehow decide to stop watching for the overs that he's batting in. Because I think he's sticking about for a little while. I think that's
part of the pleasure, Mark. I think the haters love to watch him bat, so that when he doesn't score much. There's a tweet with his average over the last however many matches. So,
should we just mention this tweet that you saw, Dom, from Ian Bishop, that says, "Can Sri Lanka now get Laharu Kumara and Asith Fernando to their optimum fitness level, keep them fit, and base their test bowler lineup around those two for the next 4 years at least?" What I think is really funny about that is he doesn't think this is Kumara at his optimum fitness level.
It's not, though. Come on. He was like barely touching 140, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I know, but he's also got to he's got to bowl for 20, right? Yeah. I think it's let's see what happens against New Zealand, right?
Yeah.
Guys, this has been the Murali End. If you've got this far, if you've listened to both sides of part 1 and part 2 of this, we might have to label it review and Q&A, England versus Sri Lanka Q&A. I don't know. We'll talk about it after we stop recording. If you've got this far and you're listening or watching, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And thanks for getting here. Leave us comments, leave us likes. We love hearing from you guys. We'll be back. I don't think it will ever be this mammoth ever again until London next year. or we've booked our place to come back to Lords. We'll see you guys soon. Thanks a lot for listening or watching. Bye.